All right, we're live.
Okay. So seeing a presence of a quorum, call to order the meeting of the Policy Subcommittee of the Regional School Committee at 6:05 p.m. on Wednesday, June 9th. And I guess we need to take roll call attendance. Carrie.
Carrie present.
Debbie.
Debbie present.
And Allison present. We have, oops, I need to download and then go back to the agenda separately. Sorry. Do we have minutes to approve? We do.
I don't remember if I sent the minutes or not. I made the minutes, but I probably forgot to email them to you.
Okay, so no minutes to approve tonight. But the first item that we are reviewing is the draft of the proposed policy for vendor diversity and commitment to that diversity, I should say. And I wonder, since that we haven't shared that, I can share that on screen so that if anybody's watching it, they can see it. And I need to make sure it's gotten. Oh, there, window. Okay. Because I was like, I don't want to share my whole screen. Okay. There. Are you seeing the Word doc?
I am.
Okay.
I'll add it to the stream. Do you want me to show just the document so it's larger for people, or do you want to stay on the screen?
We can stay on the screen.
Okay.
It'd be weird if people see just the document and no talking. Right. I can make the words bigger though. Let me. Okay. So this the request was from our Assistant Superintendent Doreen Cunningham was to create a policy that requires contractors and vendors to share the same commitment to diversity and inclusion and equity that the district does. So this is the draft that Debbie, thank you very much for doing the research and drafting this for us to review.
I don't know if it would be helpful for me to share my thinking on how I put the draft together.
That would be great.
Okay. I apologize. One of my dogs has decided to bark, so that'll be in the background. But I took the opening paragraph. The language is almost directly from policy ACB, which is our affirmative action on cultural diversity policy. That particular policy, I think, gets toward what we're wanting to do with our vendors. From there, I used language that is already in existence in some of our documents that we use when we're requesting vendors to put in bids. So the bullet points, the first bullet point comes from that. And then the second bullet point, I just based on what I know to be our goal in the district. So that's it.
Thank you for putting this together, Debbie.
I'm sorry, I said you're welcome, but I'm muted because of my tongue. I'm going to pull out of the stream for a moment and go let her out of her crate, and then I will
Okay.
be right back.
Sorry, I'm just reading.
It's okay.
Do you have any? I'm just wondering. Oh, good, perfect timing. I don't feel like I have any ads. I think this is. So yes, thank you, Debbie, for doing this work and pulling that in. I think that approach of pulling in from the what we put into our RFPs or IFBs makes perfect sense. And this strikes me as in line with the spirit of Doreen's request as well.
Yeah, I don't have any changes to suggest. I think it's likely Doreen or the committee, the larger committee, will have ideas of ways to modify or change it. But I mean, this seems like a really great starting point, and thanks.
Yeah.
Well, now I apologize for the drinking in the background. Can't keep her quiet. But if you'd like, I could share this with Doreen tomorrow at work, ask her to go over it, see if she has any suggestions that she would like us to include before we turn it over to the full committee. But I have a feeling she'll probably be pretty happy with it. I think it incorporates most of what she's looking for, but of course, she may have ideas that I'm not thinking of. So I'm happy to share it with her tomorrow.
Great. That sounds like the right next step.
And are there any legal implications here where we'd want to run it by anybody outside of, like, I'm thinking about the Mark Terry's and.
Well, I spoke to Doug Slaughter. He's the one who gave me the language for bullet point 1 from our IFBs. And he suggested that once we have something finalized, before we send it to the full committee, we send it to Mark Terry, just to make sure that we're not stepping on any legal problems. Doug didn't think it would be a problem. He thought that this could easily be added into everything that we send out. Right now, it's only in the IFBs, but he said it should be in RFPs and everything that we do, and he didn't see a problem.
Great. Okay. So our next steps on this will be that Debbie will share this with Doreen for her input, and pending that edit, we can incorporate it. I think at the end of our meeting today, we can talk about whether we want to meet once more before the meeting on the 29th. No, because this is not being on the meeting. There's no way that we'll be able to get it in for the 29th because the regionals. My only question was if we want to have a first read for the school committee on the 29th, or if we want to wait for a first read for the school committee until when we reconvene in the fall. So we can circle back on that afterward. Anything more on this one? So the other items we had was other, welcome, Stephen.
I've been watching for quite a while.
Oh.
Did you have any, are you, so if you've been watching, do you have any comments on the policy that I was just sharing on screen?
I do not.
Great.
I'm sorry if you were down there and I didn't see you. I'm distracted by my very loud and obnoxious dog. So.
Yeah, I got to watch you walk away and go uncrate your dog.
I'm sorry, I did miss you for a long time.
Excellent. So we also had on our agenda to talk about any policy referrals coming out of that last regional meeting. So that one would be the subcommittee policy. And I had shared ahead of time a first proposal that is not, I just took stab based on sort of the conversation that we had at the regional meeting. There's no, I know we haven't had a chance to talk about it, but I thought it might be easier to help us get started. So let me just share that screen. Do you see that, Debbie?
Yes, now I do. I'm so sorry. There we go.
So this is our current policy BDE subcommittees. And in the green are the edits that I started with as a starting point to suggestion for modification based on the MASC reference policy. I think also in my notes, actually, I'm going to move this so that I can see it myself. So I'm so used to Google Meet, not StreamYard. Okay. Made it too big on my screen, so now I can't see it. Okay. Okay. In my comments on the side, I think I link to some of the reference policies. No, I didn't, but that might have been in the other one. So the first suggestion, again marked in green, is in the first paragraph to right size this policy to be just subcommittees of the school committee and create a separate policy for advisory committees and task force. And then the other thing that in the reference policy, and then when I look at sort of other districts around the state and the online policy manuals, most all of them actually spell out that it's a 1-year appointment. If it's a standing subcommittee and we reappoint every year, it's more of a formality. But I do think that it might be helpful for us to sort of codify that in policy. The other change, so in the first bullet, is just, again, pulling out task force and pulling that into a separate policy. Our policy gave all authority to the chair, whereas the reference policy, as well as most other districts, say that it's actually subject to approval of the committee. I feel like we do that anyway. So I feel like that's important in case I decide to go rogue. You guys can. do that. And then the other clarification here is to pull out that the subcommittees are subcommittees of school committee, and membership is school committee members. And then again, creating that sort of clarity that a subcommittee is school committee members, and then the advisory committee policy would be would have sort of broader membership directives or possibilities. And then the other thing that the reference policy calls out in specific is really, if there are standing subcommittees, to include them and list them here. Some districts include it in their just general subcommittee policy. Others have a separate policy that lists what the standing subcommittees are. Since we have close to 200 policies, I'd be inclined to just keep it within this one versus adding another policy. So I just took language that I've seen in other, I think Belchertown was one, that other districts sort of just saying there are 4 standing subcommittees that remain in place until the annual reorganization meeting. I pulled these subcommittees from our subcommittee spreadsheet, as well as the description that's in those. And one of the questions that I had also that I think is worth having the conversation at our full committee meeting is to consider adjusting these to be a little bit more clear about what the full committee expects from our subcommittees, our standing subcommittees. So as an example, when you look at other districts, when they're describing the budget subcommittee, some say that the budget subcommittee actually reviews the annual budget. Our practice in our committee is that the whole committee reviews the budget and weighs in. We don't delegate that necessarily exclusively to the subcommittee. So some specifically call that out and don't even have a budget subcommittee. Others will have a budget subcommittee, and the role for the budget subcommittee is to work on manage and create the timeline for the overall budget process, including budget hearings and community presentations and engagement, and sort of just managing that as opposed to being the responsible group for the reviewing. So that was one idea, sort of like that would be worth discussing. The policy committee is no different. That's not one that I saw as ours being unique and different from other districts. The superintendent evaluation is one that it's a little bit different. If you look at other districts, they call it something else. I'm not saying I don't know that we need to call it something else. But in addition to developing the guidelines, the instrument, and the timeline, they also have the responsibility of proposing goals for the superintendent. So starting at the beginning of the year, managing the goal setting process as well as the evaluation process. So that was another one that I wanted us to consider there. So I'm done talking. Carrie?
So I had a couple of reactions to the draft. The first one is just, I'm not against the change where we say that it's only school committee members, but I'm looking around the virtual table and I see Debbie, and she's not a school committee member. So, but I've always really valued her participation on the committee, her knowledge, especially institutional knowledge that she brings to the table. So I guess I'm thinking, I'm realizing also that I'm on officially, I think I'm on all of the standing committees.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of that.
Yes.
As we talk about, anyways, so, but I do have some thoughts on, so that's one thing, but then I did have, if you scroll down to the committees, so I will say, like, when I was on the budget subcommittee with Sean Mangano as the finance director, we did actually function where we'd meet prior to any budget hearing and we'd go over all of the materials. It wasn't that so in the same way that the policy committee reviews the policy documents and then they get reviewed, we're not the ones making the decisions, but we did actually meet with Sean and we'd go over the documents. And I think what happened was there was a change in finance directors at the same time the pandemic hit, and the practices have shifted over time. So I don't know that our budget committee has functioned that much differently than always. I guess some of these like changes that have happened have been related to changes in personnel and changes in brought around by the pandemic.
Yeah.
And then again, the audit piece, I do think that I remember like meeting with the auditor as a member of the budget subcommittee. And we also have OPEB, which I'm also the chair. So that's another kind of sub thing out of the budget. So I don't know if it's worth, I'd be happy to like think through and flesh out some of these standing ones a little bit more. And I'm open to kind of thinking through, but I don't know if it's worth codifying the balance, but it does seem kind of funny that I sit on all of these standing ones, and I'm sure there are some. Anyway, I think we should codify the annual. You were asking the question about the annual revision of like looking at it, and I think it is worth doing that annually to think about who's on which committees.
Yeah,
it was a bit rambling, but those are my big reactions. Otherwise, I think it makes a lot of sense.
What I'm thinking, because my understanding, Debbie is actually the delegate of the superintendent, as opposed to, and I think that's based off of this line that says committee chair and superintendent are ex officio members of all subcommittees. So I think we could sort of just spell that out and say that the committee chair and superintendent or their delegate.
I like that.
Because I agree, like, and especially with the policy subcommittee, it's important to have.
Right. I think, and with the budget subcommittee, you're going to have the finance director there.
Right. Well, they're there, but are they a member?
Oh, that's true. That's true.
Yeah. Now, the one other thing too, I am glad you brought up the OPEB and the audit, because as I was going through our spreadsheet, it's called our subcommittee spreadsheet, and we talk about them as subcommittees, and yet a lot of them are appointments or representatives or job like roles that we play. And so I do think that it might be helpful for us to separate those out and sort of really be clear, this is a subcommittee, and that as the committee is delegating the work of the committee to these groups to sort of progress them in between our meetings. And then there's advisory committees and task forces that have a specific purpose. And then there's appointments or, roles or liaisons that we're required to, and that's separate, but they're not subcommittees necessarily. So that might be where that's where CPAC or BPAC or JLMSC or negotiations. There are representatives at the table for those particular meetings, or the Collaborative for Education. I had the question about the audit, because in our spreadsheet it says that the chairs do that role, but I mean, I haven't been chair for very long, but I didn't play that role this year or last year. So that's why I wasn't really sure. So I'm wondering if that actually, the way you described that, Carrie, if that's actually part of the budget subcommittee.
I mean, it was pre-pandemic. I just remember meeting with Sean as part of the budget committee and having the document shared with us and the findings.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Eric was there, so.
Debbie?
I don't know if you're still using the same spreadsheet that's the one I created. If it is,
yeah.
okay. if it is, it's because I put chairs there because that's what had been happening in the past. When I was asked to create the spreadsheet, they asked me to list all the the current members of the committee at that time. And up to that point, it had always been the chairs just meeting with the finance director to do the audit. So I don't think there was any, I don't think it's codified that it has to be the chair. I think they had just been volunteering to do it up to that point.
Well, part of that too was that our friend Trevor felt like he needed to go to every single subcommittee meeting and be on them. So that's how that happened.
So, I mean, obviously these are decisions that the full committee will make. But just like thinking, like, do we want to propose that it's a budget and audit subcommittee and combine those, since it sounds like that aligns with some past practice. Sounds like we've, depending on who's on the committee and who's in the finance office, it varies. We don't have a consistent way. So we could propose, I would say, whichever way makes the most sense.
I think that makes sense personally.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see why not.
Yeah.
And let's see. Do we really only have 3 then? Is that? Yes.
The other ones, like I said, were oh, well, so this is the question mark, right? Is then does there was one called the Data Trends Subcommittee that I think is dissolved, though it hasn't really officially been dissolved, but that's the only other one that's actually a subcommittee, as opposed to there's representatives from the committee that are participating in another committee or another thing. So that would be negotiations. That had been listed as a negotiations subcommittee. JLMSC wasn't there on that list because I was using the last one and then I forgot to include that. But that would be another example of, like, yeah, there's a standing appointment, but it's not really a subcommittee.
Mm-hmm.
And those were the only 2. SETF was the other one. And I think sort of in that one, just from conversations with the current co-chairs of that, the desire is to keep that as sort of an advisory committee with membership beyond the school committee members only. So that's why that's not here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the Data Trends Subcommittee, that was Rick Hood that was really pushing that one. And we really, since he left, we really haven't had any data that we can.
Oh,
you got muted.
Oh, I got muted.
Sorry.
Yeah, so we have nothing going on that we can trend the data, not even the high school and their.
Yeah. And I think that's something that we can talk about as a committee. And it struck me as that might be one that becomes an advisory committee. Just sort of the way it was described was to create sort of that process. What do we think about proposing the superintendent evaluation committee to encompass also the goal setting? Or do we want to keep that? I think in the past couple of years, it's been the chair.
It's interesting. I'm looking at the list on the MASC, and they have the Personnel and Policy Subcommittee. I know. I was just. It's funny to see how other places do it because it looks like MASC rolls the evaluation into the policy one. We could have even just two. I think. I don't know. I kind of like how it's worked. I mean, in the past, I don't. I guess part of me is like, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
So like, if there's a reason to do it, I think that makes sense. I'd be happy to bring the question to the full committee.
Mm-hmm.
And if people have an issue with how it's been going in the past, but otherwise, I kind of like the way it's. I mean, I know somebody must be working with the superintendent to set those initial goals, but I feel like it's actually been a fairly generative process where we all get together and talk it out.
Yeah.
The full committee.
Sorry, Debbie. I was going to say I agree. And of course it's the makeup of our current committee, but we are a committee that we all like to dig into a lot of these topics and collaborate on them. So I do feel like there's certain things that do take a chunk of time outside of the committee to do the work and progress the work in between committee meetings. And that's sort of where I went. And yet there's so much that the full committee does like to discuss and deliberate. Because you see some committees are really designed that their subcommittees are where the business is happening, and that the full committee meetings are more report outs and approvals as opposed to deliberation. And I don't see that as a fit with our personality as a committee. So, Debbie, sorry.
No, that's fine. I was just going to say, I think setting the goals with the chairs ensures that the Pelham School Committee, the Amherst School Committee, and the Regional School Committee are all going to be represented equally in setting the goals.
Yeah.
And it gives those other committees an opportunity to talk through with the superintendent if they have goals specific to their committees. So to me, that's why it makes sense for it to be the chairs doing that initial part.
Yeah. Good point. Any other thoughts on the edits here?
The only thing I just thought of was something Stephen said the other night about the policy subcommittee having a representative from, or not the policy, the evaluation committee having representatives from each district. And I wasn't even aware of that, but it seems like for the reasons Debbie just brought up, it might be good to make that explicit.
Mm-hmm.
So there's people remember that, because I don't know where that's written.
I'll keep reminding you for 2 more years before I'm done.
I'm just trying to think of membership is comprised of representatives.
Yeah, that whole thing came about after we met with the MSAC rep for about 4 hours one night, and went over all of the how poorly we were actually doing on our superintendent evaluations, because people were doing their own. Nobody was following the rules. We didn't even know what the rules were. So that's how this thing came apart. And then it was Audra Grasinski and Emily Marriott that really, I mean, we spent hours on this thing putting it together.
Yes, they did.
Okay. I wonder if we should have sort of a statement here that says each subcommittee should have representatives from more than one member town. Just to avoid it being all Amherst.
Does that happen at all? I'm trying to think of, like, the budget's pretty well balanced.
You're right that we do have. Yep.
The one thing I would say there, though, is part of it always depends on the makeup of the committee. And if you have a committee that's really collegial and wants to make sure all the towns are represented, that's great. But if you end up with a committee that, say, there's a chair who, for some reason, wants to freeze out one of the towns, that chair would not be required by this policy to make sure that all the towns are represented. So that would be my only concern about not including language around equal representation.
Yeah. Because I wonder if that would help, like, I mean, this is different. This is saying that there needs to be four members of the evaluation subcommittee versus, but I do think, like, you know.
I wonder if we should state it as a goal rather than a I'm just thinking of, like, I'm thinking I don't want to make Stephen have to be on every single subcommittee because he's the only representative from.
Yeah, that's the other problem. For Leverett and Shutesbury, their representatives would be terribly overworked.
And I think they already have sometimes, you know, this is already like the region is, I guess it is for us too, but I forget who made the comment the other day, but just the sense that they felt like volunteering for being on the region was service enough to their.
Right. And that's true. You're right about that as a regional member, they are part of the whole body. So they're representing their towns in that way.
What's funny for me is I feel like I'm a member of the regional school committee and the Shutesbury school committee, because we meet once a month for 45 minutes, is more like a subcommittee. It is fun though, being the one rep from a town, because I'm being hammered now because there is that growing, I think it's about 120 votes now. It's not enough to push them over the top, but they really are pushing for that 100% statutory. And they're all mad at me because I'm sticking to the 55 and 65.
Does this language work? Membership on each subcommittee should strive to include representatives from at least 2 member towns or districts. Maybe it should be district. No, towns.
Member towns, yeah. I like that.
Please step on.
Okay, good. So we can include that one for first read and discussion. And then I also, this one is very straightforward. I literally this is just the reference policy from MASC for us to consider. So this is the advisory committees to the school committee, and this is intended to include things like the SETF, where membership can include individuals beyond school committee members or delegates of the superintendent. So that's where that phrase comes in.
Mm-hmm.
When we say residents, if somebody is a parent of like a choice student, I guess I was just thinking of like the definition, like how do we draw the boundaries for residents?
Right. What I did, sorry, I should say, this is the model policy, and what I added, I replaced the model policy language. Sorry, I didn't include track changes, but I replaced the model policy, which talked about staff members being appointed at the discretion or recommendation of the superintendent, and just copied the language that we have in our current subcommittee policy.
Mm-hmm.
I just copied that from here and inserted it into the advisory committee. But I had that same question, Carrie, was, do we want to limit it to just residents, or should it be residents and
Like guardians or
guardians of students?
I think that makes, I mean, you know, if somebody from a town that's not included in a region wants to be a member because they have a connection to the schools directly through their family, or, you know, I don't know, it's just worth considering, because I could see it arising as something where
That's
that questions. Go ahead.
Sorry. What if you use language like members of the broader ARPS community? That would take in parents and guardians from anywhere. That would take in, you know, a grandparent who has an interest in it and a special, maybe some special skills that they could bring to it, or a member of the business community that's connected with the schools in some way. Or I don't know if you think that language is too open to interpretation, but that's one thought.
It's true about parents for school choice kids, because it was either 2 or 3 years ago that the entire Pelham PTO or PGO, whatever it is, was all school choice parents.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if we should suggest the guardian language or something similar to that, and then see if how the full committee feels about it, or other interested parties. I think resident is too specific, but I don't want to make it completely wide open. But I wonder if they're all being appointed, then it would be somebody having some way in kind of what the. And I think we should not use family members just to be inclusive, or like guardians or family members. Just for, I don't know, what's the language we usually use around?
We have been using parents or caregivers.
Okay.
So that's a
Parents
one thing that I wonder about is, do we want to say caregivers, because that could include babysitters that are after school only, and I don't know.
Right.
Like that's, I mean, in this particular case, that's I'm not objecting to the use of that phrase, but
Right.
What if somebody's would guardian, that would include foster care parents?
yeah,
I would think so, yes.
because they're legal guardians. Okay.
Should we be really, and maybe we don't need to be, but should we be really specific and say residents of the 4-member towns?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Does it matter? I'm just thinking of, like, if I were on the Amherst or Pelham, I'm just thinking like the enrollment working group, which was an Amherst specific thing. Would we want it? I'm like trying to think like relevant member town, or I Or maybe it doesn't matter because it'll work itself out.
No, I mean, that's a really good point.
It says
Because-
may include, but then it doesn't say it has to include, right? And
Right.
I think we could add something that says membership requirements will be determined,
I guess that's point 4, right? So the appointment's made by the committee. So
yeah.
That's true. And then the committee can have a discussion.
Right, because it doesn't say that the committee has to accept anybody. So if it's an Amherst only, if it's an advisory committee to the Amherst School Committee, the Amherst School Committee could decide we only want Amherst residents or parents of Amherst students.
Right.
We could just say where appropriate. I don't know. Right. It says staff and members and students may be appointed to the committees where appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna take this off. Residents, oops, that went in the residents. Residents of the 4 ARPS member towns, parents or guardians of current ARPS students, staff members and students, and staff members and students. And staff members and students also may be appointed to committees where appropriate.
I think you could even take out the "and" before staff and just put a comma after.
Correct.
I like that.
Okay. So again, this is sort of saying that it's 1 year and then you may be reappointed after 1 year.
Was 7 something from the
No, that one made me laugh. I don't know.
It just seems kind of like a very positivist statement as my.
I know. I'm really curious as to the background of how that got in there.
Yeah, I almost wonder if it's too much. I don't know. It seems a little, I don't know. Why should an emotion come into this? I don't think we should be completely robotic.
No. So it should include research and facts. I don't know. I mean, I think
it's just a funny statement. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's, yeah, not having been part of the policy group that drafted the reference policy, Yeah, I get what it's, the way I interpret it is to say that it's not an advisory committee of just saying, well, what do you think? Right? Like, it's not intended to be sort of focus groups. Like, what is your reaction to this, or what is your reaction to that? But to actually be doing some sort of compilation of.
So maybe one of the way would be saying that, like, committees will conduct research. I mean, I don't know.
How about committees will use research and fact to as input for recommendations?
Sure. And it could be qualitative research or quantitative. Yeah. You could do a focus group and then come back to us and report on what you found.
Mm-hmm. I wrote, advisory committees will use research and fact in forming recommendations.
What if instead of the word fact, you put the word data?
Yeah.
I like that.
Fact, it just feels accusatory somehow.
It does.
That's what I was thinking.
I didn't understand F, responsibilities for the release of information to the press, and I just wasn't sure what is that maybe intended for a sort of really serious advisory committees on something in case sort of but I feel like it's almost unnecessary.
I'm thinking it's in there for things like when you have a building committee. Like for the building project that we're in right now, sometimes they have the chair of that building committee actually have responsibility for talking to the press. Mm-hmm. And in most cases, that wouldn't be the case. It would be
it's still the school committee.
The school committee would still be the one to talk to the press, or the superintendent. So maybe it should say something like, well, the way it's written, it's just going back to 6. So each committee
will be.
What if it said?
I mean, if you wanted to make it explicit, you could say the chair will maintain their responsibility for release of information to the press unless otherwise instructed, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But
I was thinking we could also just say responsibilities, if any, for the release of information to the press.
Mm-hmm. That's good. I like that. That way it keeps the syntax.
Any other?
I feel like it's not worth worrying about it too much because I feel like somebody's going to have some feedback on this.
Right.
With the full committee. I think it's good. I think we've made some good updates, and I think it stood pretty well on its own to begin with.
Yeah. Good.
And I'm
right.
And I'm exhausted from our meeting last night.
I know. And it's 7:00. So. I remember, Debbie, you telling us at the very beginning that we're always very good at being 1 hour. We just
1
stop
hour,
and-
exactly.
And you're right. Okay, so are we good for bringing these to the full committee probably on the 29th? Oh no, wait, we have it on the next agenda, I think, next week. Are we good for bringing these in for a first read?
I think they're ready.
Okay. Great. Excellent. Well, thank you. So do we want to, back to the question about another possible meeting the week of the 21st. And I bring this up because I will say that I don't know where folks stand, but there is some sentiment that I've heard for wrapping this subcommittee discussion up this June. So that would be the only thing, is if it comes out that coming out of our full committee meeting next week, do we want to have a placeholder meeting for the week of the 21st in case the full committee wants us to make some refinements and consider it for a vote on the 29th?
Are we meeting on the 22nd?
We are not. We almost were. But we moved the meeting to the 14th, and so we have the the Amherst committee might be correct because of the conversation that we had yesterday. But the region right now is not scheduled to meet on the 22nd. Right now, the next region meeting is the 29th.
Okay. So I can't do the 24th, but I could probably do the 21st or 23rd potentially.
The 23rd is the employee recognition retirement event.
Yeah.
I could do the 21st if people could do it. I don't know.
Let me pull up the calendar.
If we do the 21st, could I request that it be at 6:30 instead of 6? It's just a little easier for my family.
That would work for me.
Yeah, I find that 6:30 generally is an easier time. Unfortunately, for the next meeting we have to start at 6. But the 21st, yes, 6:30 works for me. Does that work for you, Stephen? Okay.
Is that the first day of summer? It'll be the longest day of the year. We'll have lots of time to stay up and talk about policy.
Excellent. Okay, great. If there's nothing else, then I will move that we adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
And we'll take a roll call vote. Debbie.
Aye.
Stephen.
Aye.
Carrie.
Aye.
And Allison, aye. So we are adjourned.
Thank you.